All right, welcome back to AI for 2021. I hope you're having an amazing time so far. Our next panel is titled The State of AI in Customer Service, Tools, Tech, and Outcomes. Please join me in welcoming our panelists to the virtual stage. And I'll hand it over to Whitney, our moderator.
Thank you, Patrika. Hello, I'm Whitnee Hawthorne, the Vice President of Customer Support at JetBlue, and I am so excited to be here with our panel of experts as we talk more about AI and customer experience. I'll hand it over to each one of them to do their own introduction, and then we'll dive into some questions. Olga, would you like to start?
Hello, hi everyone. I'm Olga Budieri and I look after customer experience for Aramex International. I'm super excited today to incorporate the different aspects of experience design, customer journeys, and voice of customer into this panel. Thank you so much for inviting me. Back to you, Whitney.
Oh, thanks. We'll have Changsu go next.
Okay, hi, my name is Changsu. I'm founder and CEO at Allganize. At Allganize, we are helping enterprise and customer support representatives automate answering questions and from millions of text documents. We have a finance customers and insurance customers and manufacturing IT customers, and from all across the world, including US and Japan and South Korea. Very excited to be here, and thanks for having me.
Wonderful. And with that, we'll hand it over to our third panelist, Devang.
Hey, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here along with Whitney, Changsu, and Olga. My name is Devang Sachdev. I'm the VP of Marketing at Snorkel AI. So Snorkel AI was founded out of Stanford AI Lab. We are looking to solve one of the core challenges that's blocking machine learning today, which is how do we scale the training data that feeds the machine learning models. As far as our approach goes, it's used over several different use cases, including customer service. And I have the privilege of working very closely with Fortune 500 companies to help them put AI to use for use cases such as conversational AI, automated routing, automated assessments, and others within customer service using AI. Prior to joining Snorkel, a little bit about myself, I had led product and marketing for Twilio Flex, which is a customer service solution from Twilio. And that's where I had the privilege of connecting more deeply with customers like Shopify, Lyft, Allianz, helping them take their contact centers from a heavily phone-focused contact centers to a lot more digital and omni-channel contact centers, which consumers prefer.
Wonderful. Thanks, Devang. I'm so excited to have this panel with us and all of these great experts with various interests and diversity in the AI world. With that, let's go ahead to our first question. All right, so AI is getting a lot of hype right now. Is it worth the attention, specifically when it comes to customer service? I think I know the answer, but why don't I hand it over to Olga to give us her thoughts?
I think that's a very important question. Thank you for that, Whitney. So the difference between it being a hype and being a sustainable project or a feasible project for an organization is that you actually have to have very specific goals in mind and a very specific use case. So you can't just say you're implementing AI in customer service. You have to really understand what are the transactions that are happening, where can you have AI in the loop, and where can you have a human in the loop. And typically when you have that break between AI and human, this is where you sort of achieve that balance and you achieve that ROI that executives are looking for. So then you're able to say it is worth the investment because it's not going to be cheap, right? You're going to be investing your time, you're going to be investing financials, but also you're going to be investing a lot of effort in training the model and in understanding it. For us in Aramex, particularly because a lot of our chats, for example, on our WhatsApp for Business chatbot happens in Arabic, which is a very interesting language to train, and you have all of those different dialects and you have all of those. So not everything works for us. So we have to be very cautious about how we introduce the different use cases. And we have at the moment, I think, about 3 or 4 use cases that are working very well for us. We've got a tracking use case that's working very well, a scheduling use case that's working very well. So it has to be really achievable and you have to grow it over time. So you have to have some faith. When we first started with our use cases, we had about 13% success rate. And now we're at 64, 2 years into the project. So it's a very interesting journey-like related project that you have to take on.
Wonderful. And I know, Devang, you have some thoughts on this as well.
No, I would just chiming into the same question, kind of agreeing with Olga that it is about the use case rather than just saying, hey, we've implemented AI at our organization. But just stepping back and a little bit talking about the hype itself. So the contact center market, which is a subset of customer service, is approximately $24 billion. Now, within that, we are starting to hear things like conversational AI, which is one small use case within that broader context of AI for customer service. It's going to become a $10 to $14 billion market by 2025. Now, in some sense, this could be considered hype. In some sense, just stepping back a little bit and thinking about what kind of use cases are really driving these kind of estimates. And there are two very obvious areas. One of them is self-service. Another one is agent assist. And in both of these areas, we know that the experience is still suboptimal. Self-service is not truly self-service, both for the consumer as well as for the business. And then agent assist continues to be quite rudimentary. So for me, yes, there is a sense of hype, but at the same time, there's a lot more that we need to achieve in order for this hype to be turned into reality. And there's some strong progress in the last couple of years. Now, my last point over here is that there are true barriers. So we have to be careful and cautious about what next steps we take to be successful with AI. And one of those barriers is the data itself. And I would love to dive into that a little bit more in detail as we go through our presentation. But keeping in mind the data and then seeing the impact of that when it comes to bias or when it comes to error rates in prediction would be a key barrier to realizing hype that we see with AI.
Yes, we are definitely going to get more into that. But keeping it on this first question, I know that Changsu also has some opinions to share.
Yes. So to bring the AI into the customer service, we can think about in major two different perspectives. The first thing is how we can help customer support representatives and then to give the better support to the customers. So even though AI is bring the more power into the customer support, I don't really think self-support, self-serving of AI is going to be the 100%, and because the customer still needs kind of the emotional touch in a way really human. So we have a really interesting data on this. So for example, Whitney, you mentioned about you are moving into your customer support is moving to the digital. That digital is email. So we are seeing still email is the dominant customer support channel. But here the really interesting thing is, when we are working with insurance and finance customers, then they are sending a lot of the handwritten filled forms via email, and then in that attachment. People think that, okay, one attachment is just one kind of file, but it's not actually, it contains 20, 30 different files. And then something is really, the miswritten and etc. And then customer support representatives are actually spending tons of time for reading it and then in extracting some important information. And while they are supporting their customers over the phone. So the bringing the correct tools for the customer support, and so that they can give the better the services to the customers, and actually the shortening the customer support and working time per each call is super important. So when we bring the concept search, and then which is actually the finding an answer, and then from many of the text documents and guide documents, and we saw that this better search is actually bringing 25% into 30% reduction of the the waiting time and per each call. So this is really the big the bringing the better train with equipped with AI into the CSR.
Wonderful. Those are some really great thoughts. And one of the things that Changsu was referring to specific to JetBlue is that we are currently in the middle of our digital transformation. And I don't use that word lightly. I know, coming from an IT background, that it is overused. But when I took over the group, we were about 80% phones and 20% digital. That digital was largely email. I'm currently leading the group through an effort that will take us to 70% digital and about 30% on the phones, with that digital largely being chat, AI, ML based. And with that, I will take it over to the next question. Yes, this is a good one. And everything that we were kind of alluding to before, which is how does AI enable better customer service? And let's give some specific examples. I'd love to start with Devang.
Excellent. Whitney, I have 4 areas where I believe AI can be a good starting point, and you can start with a couple of these, or you can start with one specific one as an experiment and build up upon it. And as far as which of these areas to pick depends upon your organizational competency, the skill set that you have, and also the business need that you have. But the very first and the most obvious one is around digital self-service, especially powered through conversational AI. And specifically, if you think about that, if you return any product on Amazon today, you see a lot of hints about such a conversational or such a digital self-service experience where you go find your old product that you had purchased, trigger a return, and it kickstarts that process of delivering a label to you digitally, and then you having to drive over and dropping your package where it needs to be shipped back. Now, for the most part, this flow works. But with AI, we need to make sure that this flow works even when the flow is not as straightforward or things tend to go wrong in this flow. And so there could be reasons for human intervention within this process if there is a risk of fraud, if there is a risk of mislabeled information, if there's a risk of if there's a question that's raised by the customer as well. So there are several reasons why a human in the loop is necessary, even with a self-service use case. Another similar one is on the flip side, where timely assessments of agents is a good one, and that is starting to be supported with some common AI techniques, whether it's coaching-based pop-ups based on speech recognition or identifying particular keywords and using that in analysis of agents' performance. The real question is that at which point, how do you create the balance between overly reliant on AI or using a human to again participate in that coaching experience, in that training experience with agents, and truly make it a good experience for the agent itself to put AI to use. And last 2 ones, which I'll go into small detail, are around improved routing. We want to make sure that when consumers call or reach over chat, SMS, or whichever other channel, that they're routed to the right agent who has the information or the skills to be able to help them, whether it's language-based skills, like you said, Olga, Arabic, or it is some very specific information about a product. And lastly, it's about knowing the customer better. So even when a consumer has reached out and you're transitioning from an AI conversation to a human-led conversation, how do you make that transition in a way in which the agent knows the previous context and has information about the consumer to be able to pick up the conversation from where conversational AI left it, rather than having to restart it? So those are my few areas. I'll hand it over back to you, Whitney.
Thank you. That is a lot of really great information. And 2 of the things I picked up on what you said is just the need for that good data and good information to feed the AI, as well as the fact that people will still be around. We still need folks. The AI does not specifically replace all of our folks. Olga, what do you think about this?
I think this last point that you bring up, Whitney, around humans will still be around, it relates very much to something that I keep on saying internally to our stakeholders whenever we're working on a project. And the statement is human interactions for human agents. It's very, very typical for a call center to receive a lot of calls. And for Aramex, a lot of these calls are, where's my package? When does it arrive? I mean, it's not rocket science, right? That's what customers want to know. And these calls can get frustrating if the customer is not able to self-serve or if they're not able to track their package. So what we've done was introduce in our core markets a voice bot that will identify their need, and then based on previous preferences in terms of their address, etc., allow them to self-serve. So this reduced our call volumes by 40%. And what this allowed us to do was to actually refocus the really important calls, the complaints, places where, for example, the package is being delayed or there is an update that doesn't sound quite right, to a human agent who can then take on the conversation and inform the customer, and then either issue an internal call to action or take an action on their shipment. So this makes the conversation much more human, as opposed to just adding more and more of a workforce that's expected to answer really basic questions. So then you're able to take all of this and then incorporate it around organizational capability, HR, learning and development, even your programs in terms of quality assurance become completely different, because you are focusing on experience, on empathy, on problem solving skills, rather than just answering questions and looking at average handling time and waiting time. So you're focusing on completely different metrics, and this derives a much better experience, because then you're able to reuse those resources or this budget or this sort of allocation that you had earlier into something more substantial. And I think there's here a question of, do you use AI for insights or action? I am a proponent of using AI for action, to be honest, because I think that's where the greatest value comes for the organization. So this is where we are at the moment with our journey. And I know that Changsu is really eager to chime in here. So back to you, Whitney.
Thank you. I think one of the things that you shared there that I'm sure we'll pick up on later is, as we move into a world where we're utilizing AI more and it's handling those more simple transactions, what are the KPIs that we're using to measure our folks and our call centers and productivity? Those have to change along with this new way of working. And yes, Changsu, what is your perspective on this question?
Yeah, so I think we touched on a really great point. So how, in terms of the bringing AI into the customer service, and I think the most important thing is the end user's experience and their satisfaction. So it's really clear nobody really wants to spend like hours and 30 minutes. Like nobody really wants to have a chit chat and wait in a customer supporting agent, and nobody really wants to like make call again and again and to get the really simple information. So how we can bring AI and really super focusing on, and these end users, the experience is super important. So we have a really the interesting case study about this. So we have a case study with Indonesian carrier, a telecommunication company. So like as the Olga mentioned, what these customers are asking is pretty simple. Like they want to change their plan, or what happened to their membership, and etc. But they still need to wait a pretty long time. And we work with the company. So like when in every single call, like what is the biggest the work chain and for this CSR, and the customer support agent. And then we found two things. The first thing was just finding an answer, and because all of these informations are somewhere in the other database, other system, and somewhere in other document, etc. So really well-trained agent can find an answer pretty quickly. But as we all know, customer support agent, their turnover is really high, and then training the customer support agent, and then just the newly hired into the well-trained one, it takes a long time. So the biggest one is finding an answer from the proper place. It takes a pretty long time. The second one is, even though the call is over, and then these customer support representatives, they need to extract information, they need to summarize, etc. So these two tasks are the most time-consuming tasks, and it actually gives a pretty bad impact into the end user and customer satisfaction. So we resolve these two tasks by bringing the AI solutions. And the first thing is a cognitive search solution to find an answer immediately, and then from multiple different sources of knowledge. And the second thing is automatically extracting all of the important information in this the chat log. And then by doing that, the company actually found that per agent in average 41 hours per month was actually saved. And the other two interesting number is in every single call, and there was like 1-2 minute reduction of the waiting time, and by increasing the AI accuracy 10%, and for that search system. So they figuring out which task takes the most time-consuming one, and for each every single agent, and then fixing that issue by bringing the AI. I think that is eventually bringing a lot better customer satisfaction into the customer.
Wonderful. Thank you for those very specific examples. That was super insightful. Let's move on to the next question. So what challenges do organizations face when leveraging AI for customer service? I told you we were going to get to these things. With that, let me hand it over to Devang, as you're the first one who talked about data and the need for it.
Yeah, right before I dive into data, I just wanted to connect back with something that Olga said, which is about human in the loop. And there are two parts to AI, right? One part is when you have AI in production, and it is performing with some amount of predictive accuracy. And within that predictive accuracy bounds, you have the rest of the application where a human may participate or not. So that's one environment. Another environment is when AI is actually developed. You are actually building the application, you're training the models. And there's an element of including humans in that process today as well. Today, you have training data that is taken from transcripts and call records and other things as examples that's being fed to the model to learn. But what if, rather than just showing them those examples one by one, what if you could use actual human agents to describe heuristics or to be able to describe real life examples, to use those agents in actually labeling that data, but rather than labeling it by hand, meaning one data point at a time, using the agents to describe their knowledge as one would think about labeling functions. And if we are able to do that, then we solve for two challenges that exist in this stage of building AI applications. One challenge is that the labeled data itself is scarce and available in very little quantity. And second challenge is that we can keep the labeling process within the company itself. So rather than having to ship to a third party that may or may not have the information that your business might need to create the AI application, or your data might be sensitive. You might be dealing with PII, you might be dealing with HIPAA compliance. And this way, you're able to actually move your unlabeled or raw data into labeled data by translating an agent's knowledge, a supervisor's knowledge into real applications. I mean, in some sense, a lot of AI projects fail today because of this lack of data. And when you move to some programmatic techniques, things that the Snorkel team has worked on for several years, then it becomes easier and easier to build more accurate applications rather rapidly. I'll hand it back to you, Whitney.
Thank you. That was very interesting and a lot of learning there. And I think cautionary tales for folks who are diving into their AI journey. And I know, Changsu, you have a few thoughts on this as well.
Yes, I absolutely agree with what Devang said. So AI is all about data. So the biggest difference of the software and AI is like once you make great software, it works well everywhere. But even though you make great AI, it cannot really guarantee work well everywhere. And because the AI performance is deeply connected with the data quality. So if you put the garbage data in and absolute garbage data out, so how we can make that data working really well and evenly high quality in all the places is super important. So in terms of data, and especially in customer support perspective, and we should think about two things. The first thing is those scarcity of the training data. So the customer, and usually customer support center has a lot of the log, the conversation log in between the agent and the end users, but those data are actually log, not the real data. So when we introduce Allganize into our customers, or why the customers of the Allganize are actually choosing us, is because we are saying we are not asking any kind of the manual data tagging to the customers. So when enterprise customers are selecting AI solutions, and they need to put tons of money for the training data preparation, which is called the data tagging, and they spend really the big resources in preparing that. And then, but even after deploying this AI to the production, and because AI is always about data, and then so these kind of the continuous tagging efforts should be done, and even after the production. So this is really the big blocker, and then for the enterprise customers. So how Allganize team is solving this problem is, and we are introducing the self-supervised learning technique. So self-supervised learning technique means tons of unlabeled data, such as customer support chat log and conversation log. And then from these unlabeled data, the machine is automatically making the training data. And then these automatically they generate training data are being used for the fine tuning and then training the AI model, and then which also gives the state of the art the accuracies and to these the organized enterprise customers. So this one is the biggest blocker. The second one is because customer support contains a lot of PII information. So like when we are working with big enterprise customers, and because they have that data, so they want to pass in some of the sample data to us, but those even sample data and it contains the PII. So they need to work and to remove the PII information and to work with the AI vendor. So this is in a kind of deadlock communication. So how we can effectively remove the PII data, and which is also happening inside the customers in the private network is super important. So solving these data chain issues and between the enterprise customer and the AI vendor is really the key thing, and then to bring the AI for enterprise customers. Okay, thank you. Back to you.
Yeah, that's super fascinating. Thank you for sharing. And I really appreciate kind of the last part there that you shared about essentially keeping customers safe as we move all of this data around. Olga, what are your thoughts on the question?
I think I bring a very different perspective here. So in terms of the challenges and just what would be the challenges as an organization that's over 30 years old, and we've got a lot of homegrown systems, a lot of systems that integrate, and a lot of microservices. In some cases, it can be very daunting to talk about implementing or transforming an experience, because it involves so many systems you can't even wrap your head around, and it's different databases, different layers, and it's different stakeholders. So there is always that perception that whenever you're implementing AI, it's all or nothing. And I don't think that's true, because you can go piecemeal, you can go, it's a very agile process, and you can try use case by use case, or you can try it on a part of the experience or a proof of concept, and then you can move on. And that is also your ticket to convince the different stakeholders, because you're dealing with a lot of org politics, you're dealing with a lot of people who don't want to let go of their contact center agents, who don't want to let go of this sort of power that they've got, because they would have grown this process or this sort of structure, and they don't want to let go. And it's very hard to do that all at once. But then when you bring to the table, this is what we've done with this product or with this segment of customers, and this is what we think we can impact in the next 30 days, 6 months, 9 to 18 months, then this becomes a very convincing use case and a very convincing business case for the executives, who then back you up in terms of removing all of those different barriers, and just making sure that we're able to implement AI where it makes sense, and not just for the sake of saying we've implemented AI in customer service. And we've seen a lot, I don't know if that's true also in other regions, but we've seen a lot of different airlines, different banks who have implemented AI and voice bots, and then they rolled back. So then you begin to think, what were the different sort of objectives of these projects, and what was the scope, and what did that mean for them to roll back in terms of organizational shifts, or did they pick up on the different experiences that were lacking? So you have to be very cautious when you're implementing AI. And whenever we're implementing anything like a voice bot or WhatsApp changes, we supplement that with a lot of user research. We send our team to the field. We do scheduled interviews. We do guerrilla recruiting. We ask our agents. I think that's a very important point that Devang and Changsu raised before, in terms of incorporating other people of the organization and just figuring out what are their challenges and bringing that to the table when you are in design, just before, or actually long before, you go into production and into the live phase. So I think this is where we're at with this journey. Back to you, Whitney.
That's wonderful. I really appreciate everything that you said there, and thinking about how many organizations do have multiple systems, and making sure that you can either create specific use cases based on what you have access to and what data you're able to pull, or where you can get those systems to talk together, is extremely important. And you really hit on another thing that I truly believe is, when I think about software or product implementation, I feel like it's 20% software and 80% change management. And I think you really hit on that with the story that you shared there. Let's move on to the next question. All right, great. What collaboration paths within the organization would need to change to implement AI in customer service successfully? So if I'm going to restate this, it's how can we better collaborate across organizations to make sure that that AI implementation is very successful? And Olga, you kind of touched on that already, so maybe I'll hand it over to you to start.
Thanks for that. So it doesn't have to be a bunch of engineers sitting in an ivory tower who are just thinking and saying, this is what the great experience looks like. It has to be people from digital, people from design, UX, UI, customer service, contact center, operations. And this is very typical for us. We have people from all over. It does turn into a messy process at times, but then it brings all of the different perspectives whenever we're designing all of these things. And then when you get to the point where you want to ask for the investment, in the project, you definitely want to involve HR just to understand what are the different structures that would be changing because of this project, but also finance in order to properly estimate the impact across the organization, the OPEX and the CAPEX that would come with it. And definitely marketing and PR, because you want to make those things known, you want to communicate it internally and externally. So you want to have a solid plan there to let your customers know that this is what we're doing and why. Particularly if you are targeting this for a specific segment. And typically what we see in terms of AI and customer service is being targeted towards consumers, definitely as a first target, but then you can see small to medium enterprises, or what we typically call long tail customers. So these would be customers with large volumes of transactions, but don't necessarily constitute a large chunk of your revenue. So you want to ensure that you communicate the message properly, why you're implementing AI and what will that impact in their day-to-day and in their journey.
Wonderful, Olga. And Devang, I think you have some thoughts on this too.
Yeah, Whitney, I wanted to come back to something that you said earlier, which is 20% of effort is the change or the development, and then 80% is the change management. So maybe for my response, I'd like to focus on the 20%, which is the actual development. And I think, Olga, you mentioned earlier, which was that AI development, or Changsu, you mentioned that AI development and AI applications themselves are quite different from software, because software is deterministic, whereas AI can change even when it's put into production based on if your data is drifting or your business objectives are changing. So when it comes to application development, if you just think about software development, you have a contact center application. You want to create a pop-up from your CRM into your agent interface. That's a very straightforward change, right? But if you're trying to do this in an AI-driven fashion, you need a few different people involved in this process. First of all, you need someone who understands the agent's user experience. You need someone who understands not just the user experience, but has enough knowledge as much as an agent would, because nobody understands your customer better than your agent themselves. So how do you include the agent in this process? And I touched on it a little bit earlier too. In fact, if you involve the agent and agent teams into the change process, then management automatically becomes a little bit easier, because they know they are preparing for that change to come through. The other person, or the people roles who are involved in this, are the data scientists. They're the ones who are responsible for making sure that the models that you pick, the data that you're using, is clean data. It is the data that is relevant, that's not going to introduce any bias, or it's not going to create any compliance issues. That's another thing with AI, that because you are working a lot more with data rather than the model or the algorithm itself, you need to make sure that you're able to control some of these issues that could arise downstream and would be very hard to chase. And then there are a few other roles that are new compared to software engineering, something that we call machine learning engineering and machine learning operations. These are the people who understand model behavior, and they're able to scale that model behavior to be put into production when it comes to governance, security, and again, privacy and risk compliance. So for me, it's really important to have a platform that allows all these different roles to collaborate. And at the end of the day, it starts with taking that agent's knowledge and translating it into training data and using that to turn into models.
Devang, thank you for sharing that. And I think that's such a great point, what you're bringing up. Just earlier, you had spoke about keeping humans in the loop kind of on the end, and it's also humans in the loop in the development, and we need them there to make sure that the right information is being pumped into the system. So thank you so much for that viewpoint and the perspective. And Changsu, I know you have more to share here too.
Yeah, so I think here we have one comment that well-developed AI, even really well-developed AI, is not going to completely replace the customer support agent. So the human in the loop will stay, and it will bring a lot better efficiency. So really interesting point in how enterprises can bring AI to their customer support, the workflow more successfully. Based on our experience, and we've been seeing pretty different cases. But the most successful case that we've seen was the initiative and the ownerships are actually in customer support agent side. So like when, for example, the engineering team or data science team or the executive team is saying, okay, this is something that we need to do, this is the KPI, and then we should bring the AI into your workflow, or to self-serve bot or etc. But even though self-service bot is deployed, then customer support agents are the extra human and extra employees, and they need to work with the end users. So without having the ownership and initiative and from the real field employees, and that is really hard and to be successful. So and then from many cases, we have one case. It was a pretty big, the major game company, and they also have the really big customer support center. So they get like a phone, email, and then bot, the chatbot, and then everything. But these, the customer support team actually wanted to bring a lot better efficiency by bringing the AI, and then they were super active. So it's pretty different from the other companies. Other companies' cases, all these initiatives are coming from the executive team, but these companies and every single agent was really active and making a lot of suggestions into our companies. And then we've seen really high adoptions and those the accuracy increase and customer satisfaction increase in a really short time, and it happened. And we've analyzed why only why that company is doing that so great. And then our result was our analysis is the guys who are actually working on it, and they should have an ownership, and they need to realize why they need to bring the AI into their workflow. Okay, thank you. Back to you, Whitney.
Wonderful. Those were all really great responses, and I think it's given us all a lot to think about, but we're not done yet. We have another question. The future question. So we talked a little bit earlier about whether this is hype or not, this idea of AI and customer experience. And so now I'd love to hear from you. How do you anticipate the customer service to look 7 years from now? And I know that's a crazy question because technology changes so quick, it's hard to predict what's going to be going on 18 months to 2 years from now, but I'll let you have at it. Devang, tell us your thoughts.
Yeah, I'm no fortune teller, but if I had to place some bets, I would place it into a couple of different areas where I think AI would turn from a hype to a reality. One of this is, in customer service, we say there's a holy grail about being able to offer proactive service, predicting a customer or consumer's needs and blockages even before they've taken place. And today, some of that is starting to happen. So when you order food through a food delivery service, they know that you're hungry, and that's why they send you, your order has been received, and your order is being prepared, and your order is now on your way. And here's a map that you can see where they are exactly. And that just gives us a little bit more comfort as hungry consumers, but it gives the company, the restaurant, and everybody involved in this process a lot more cost savings, because we are not calling every 5 minutes saying, where is my food? And proactive, this is a very rudimentary example of what proactive service could mean, but how would we apply this to other domains that are not necessarily all about real-time delivery? Is a whole area of customer service that could start flourishing, or that is starting to flourish because of predictive technologies that we have with AI. Another one is around transparency. So with a lot of organizations, as I mentioned before, and Changsu kind of touched on this too, is access to data is hard. And there are two things that are happening that are making access to data easier. One is there are technologies that are making it easier to capture data, whether it's through speech or documents, things that remain in the real world, in the analog world, and then turning that into more digital information. And then systems that are making this information a lot more structured and a lot more intelligent. So whether it's labeled data or whether it's systems like customer data platform, CDPs, that make the data a lot more readily available to other systems. And then between these two things, proactive service and transparency of customer interactions, when you start layering in things like where AI is not necessarily just a domain of data scientists, but it is also a domain of analysts. And it is also maybe a domain in the future where agents themselves are preparing applications that are intelligent through some of the techniques that I mentioned previously, like programmatic labeling or weak supervision or knowledge capture. Then now you are starting to look at a whole new world where in some ways we take AI for granted, but in a lot of ways we rely on AI. And I would certainly want to be in that future 7 years from now.
That does sound like a wonderful future to me. Olga, what are your thoughts on where the future of AI is headed?
7 years is such a long time. As Devang mentioned, it's very hard to predict what's going to happen in the next 1 or 2 years. I think one of the key things is that even if you look at customer centricity and all of those different cultural models, one of the key components is customer insights, but also customer foresights, competitor insights, and competitor foresights. So you're always looking as to see what's happening in the market and how relevant is that to you. For example, drones or automated vehicles. To what extent would that be relevant to your industry? Otherwise, you would suffer the same fate as many have gone in terms of just improving the camera experience or just improving the calling experience rather than connecting two different people regardless of the means. So the way that you want to look at it is really understand what's happening and do your own exercise, not just look at what others are doing, because there could be others that are impacting your business, but they're completely from a different domain. For example, a very key thing that we see in logistics is food delivery services are really impacting customer expectations. So people are saying, if I can get a meal in an hour or an hour and a half, why can't I get my order from a local store in an hour or an hour and a half? And that begs a lot of differences in the way that you operate internally as a company. So you would be looking at different models, maybe even lesser facilities. Now with the pandemic and everything, we've all learned that remote working is sort of working, and hybrid remote and office working is okay as well. So you would see that all of those different things happening at once. And that I usually connect, and I think it's really connected with the gig economy because it's still relevant. And the more you look at it, you might be looking at more people, for example, in our business that would be willing to deliver packages, which is something that we already do in Saudi, which is Aramex fleet. And then you have a lot of those Uber-like experiences. And when you look at that, I think a very key point that Devang mentioned was around user experience, employee user experience, which is very, very important because you're onboarding people in such a short period of time. So you want to make sure that their experience on your application is super easy. They are able to serve the customers as well. So I think this is also where AI is going to be a very key or important field. The other thing that I think it will impact is those different neat boxes that we used to have, as in this is an inbound contact center, this is an outbound contact center, this is a social media team, you will no longer have that because you would have more of preferences of customers who prefer asynchronous sort of messaging, or they want to message at their own convenience or self-serve. So you wouldn't have that transaction that has to happen at that time. So that will definitely increase the agent efficiency, but also that will increase the number of skills that agents need to learn and their ability to some extent multitask or be able to serve multiple customers at the same time. So I think this is all interconnected. Back to you, Whitney.
Thank you, Olga. And I agree. I think everything is interconnected. And I love the point that you brought out about it's not just about how we see technology developing, but also about how the world around us is changing. And you cited a pandemic that no one could have predicted and the change that that's had. I think that's super fascinating. I'm going to hand it over to Changsu. I know you have a few thoughts on this, and I will let you close us out with those.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so if we think about the current customer supporting process, in a customer perspective, everything is pool-based. The pool-based means like if something happens and you need to make a call and then you need to have a chat, and then you should go to some proper resources and from the customer by themselves. So that is a pool. But I think in 7 years, again, it's in such a long time, but it's going to be push based. And if we think about the push is in a kind of all the promotions and marketing and just sending information the customer never have asked and customer doesn't really want to. But going to push way of the customer service, and at the exact moment the customer really needs some information, customer really wants to solve that the issues. So figuring out what would be that best perfect moment, and then it can be different in the user by user, and some customer wants to have the more interactive communication in the way the company side, or some customer they just want to just let them be and really minimalize the interactions. So this is different, and then from all the situations and all the users. And so at the moment, and there is no way to figure out when this user exactly are going to ask something. So this is the align with what Devang mentioned and what Olga mentioned, like the proactive way, the more the predictive, the communication, and then from the app side and from the company side into the customer is super important. So yeah, in 7 years, like the current 100% pull-based customer support, I think that'll be, I don't really think that would be the 100%, the push-based one, and that'd be super challenging. But somewhere hybrid, like 70-30, even 70-30% of the pull and push-based customer support. So like ultimately evolving to the customer relationship, and then more to the marketing side, and in these mixtures, I think that is something that AI can truly contribute into the future of the customer support. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Changsu. And thanks to all of our panelists. This was wonderful. A lot of food for thought, a lot of really great points, diverse points. And I will turn it back over to Patricia.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This has been fantastic. And I know our virtual audience is giving you a huge virtual round of applause. Thank you to all of our panelists, and a special thank you to Whitney for moderating and keeping us on track. That was an amazing conversation filled with so many amazing insights. For the audience, it's time for you to make your way to your next session. Along the way, make sure you accept your connection request and take some time to check out our amazing exhibits. Thanks so much, and we'll see you around.